The morning sun cast long shadows across the front lawn of the small house on Maple Street. Samuel and Dorothy Richardson had lived there for 42 years. They raised 3 children in that house, painted the walls a dozen times, planted the oak tree that now towered over the driveway. Samuel was 78 now, with silver hair and hands that trembled slightly from age. Dorothy was 76, with kind eyes, and a voice that still carried the gentle warmth of her Alabama childhood. They had rented the house their entire marriage, never quite able to save enough for a down payment, but it had always been home. 3 months ago, the old landlord passed away. His son, Trevor Hastings, inherited the property. Trevor was 34 and saw only dollar signs. The house sat on a corner lot in a neighborhood that had slowly transformed. Coffee shops replaced corner stores. Young professionals moved into renovated bungalows. Property values climbed. Trevor wanted to renovate and flip the house. The elderly couple living there on a month-to-month lease were in his way. He raised the rent by $800. Samuel and Dorothy lived on fixed incomes, Social Security, and a small pension from Samuel's 40 years working at the Postal Service. They could not afford the increase. Trevor knew that when they explained their situation, he handed them an eviction notice. 30 days. Samuel held Dorothy's hand as they read the paper. They had nowhere to go. Their savings would not cover first and last month's rent anywhere else in the city. Dorothy called their daughter in Phoenix, but she lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 teenagers. Their son Marcus was overseas doing missionary work. Then there was David. David Richardson was 52 years old. He wore his federal judge's robes with the same quiet dignity his parents had taught him. He had been adopted by Samuel and Dorothy when he was 7 years old, a scared, skinny kid bouncing through foster homes. They gave him love, stability, a belief that he mattered. They attended every parent-teacher conference, sat in the front row at his high school graduation, took out a loan they could barely afford to help with his college tuition. David became a lawyer, then a prosecutor, then a federal judge appointed to the bench just 3 years ago. He lived 4 hours away, but called his parents every Sunday. This Sunday, Dorothy's voice shook as she told him about the eviction. David listened in silence. When she finished, he said only, "I will be there on Tuesday." Trevor arrived at the house that Tuesday morning with a smug confidence. He brought a police officer as backup, just to make sure there was no trouble. He also brought his real estate agent to take photos for the listing. Samuel and Dorothy stood on their porch, Samuel leaning on his cane, Dorothy gripping his arm for support. "You folks need to start packing," Trevor said, holding up the eviction notice. "This is legal and proper. You have 2 weeks left." Samuel took a slow breath. "Sir, we have been good tenants for over 40 years, never missed a payment, took care of this place like it was our own. Could you please reconsider?" Trevor shook his head. "Business is business, nothing personal. I can get 3 times the rent with new tenants after renovation. You should have bought a house when you had the chance." The words stung. Dorothy felt tears building but refused to let them fall. She had lived through segregation, through decades of quiet indignities. She would not give this young man the satisfaction of seeing her cry. That was when a black SUV pulled up to the curb. The door opened and David stepped out. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His presence commanded immediate attention. Behind him came a federal marshal in uniform and another man in a dark suit carrying a briefcase. David walked up the path with measured steps. His face was calm, but his eyes held steel. Trevor noticed the entourage and straightened up slightly, trying to maintain his authority. "Can I help you?" he asked. David stopped at the base of the porch steps. His parents looked at him with a mixture of relief and concern. "Son," Dorothy said softly, "you did not have to come all this way." David smiled at her gently. "Yes, I did, Mama." Then he turned to Trevor. His voice was courteous but cold. "I am Judge David Richardson, Federal District Court. These are my parents." Trevor's confidence flickered. "Your parents," he repeated. "Yes," David said. "Samuel and Dorothy Richardson. They have resided at this address for 42 years. I understand you are attempting to evict them." Trevor recovered quickly. "Look, Judge, or whatever, this is a private property matter. I own this house. I have every legal right to evict tenants who cannot afford the rent." David nodded slowly. "You are correct that you own the property, and you filed an eviction notice. However, I had my colleague here," he gestured to the man with the briefcase, "review your paperwork and the history of this tenancy." The man stepped forward. "I am Attorney Gerald Mitchell, specialized in housing law. Your eviction notice contains several deficiencies. You failed to provide proper notices required by city ordinance for tenants of this duration. You also did not account for the rent control provisions that apply to this property given its age and the length of tenancy." Additionally, your rent increase exceeds the maximum allowable increase under state law for senior citizens on fixed incomes. Trevor's face reddened. That is nonsense. My lawyer approved everything. David's expression did not change. Then I suggest you consult a different lawyer, because if you proceed with this eviction, my parents will have grounds to sue for wrongful eviction, age discrimination, and violation of tenant protection statutes. The penalties can be substantial, including treble damages and attorney fees. Trevor looked at the police officer as if for support, but the officer stepped back. This is a civil matter, sir. I am just here to keep the peace. The real estate agent quietly slipped away down the sidewalk. Trevor's jaw clenched. You cannot intimidate me with legal threats. I know people too. David smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. I am sure you do. However, I am a federal judge. I do not make empty threats. I deal in facts and law, and the facts are quite clear. Your eviction is improper. If you pursue it, you will lose, and it will cost you far more than any potential profit from flipping this house. He paused. There is also the matter of the foundation. What foundation? Trevor asked sharply. Attorney Mitchell opened his briefcase and pulled out a report. We had a structural engineer inspect the property yesterday evening, with permission from the tenants, of course. There are significant foundation issues, likely due to deferred maintenance over the past decade. Any sale would require full disclosure. A repair estimate is included, approximately $45,000. Trevor snatched the report. His hand shook slightly as he flipped through the pages. David continued, Of course, my parents have maintained this home beautifully, given its age, but the underlying structural issues are the owner's responsibility. You inherited those problems from your father. Trevor looked up. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated. So what do you want? David glanced at his parents. They stood on the porch, Samuel's arm around Dorothy's shoulders. They had given him everything. Now it was his turn. I want you to offer my parents a long-term lease, 10 years minimum, at their current rent with a maximum annual increase of 2%. Locked in and legally binding. Trevor's mouth opened to protest. David held up a hand. Or you can face a lawsuit that will take years and cost you everything. Your choice. The silence stretched out. A neighbor walking her dog slowed down to watch. The police officer shifted his weight. Finally, Trevor exhaled sharply. Fine. 10 years. Current rent. David nodded to Attorney Mitchell, who pulled out a prepared lease agreement. Trevor signed it with angry, sharp motions. When it was done, he stormed off to his car without another word. The police officer tipped his cap to Samuel and Dorothy before leaving. David climbed the porch steps. Dorothy wrapped her arms around him. She was crying now, but they were tears of relief and gratitude. Thank you, baby, she whispered. Thank you so much. Samuel shook his son's hand, then pulled him into a tight embrace. You did not have to do all this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, I did, David replied. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You taught me right from wrong. You showed me what it means to stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves. This is what you raised me to be. They stood together on that porch, the morning sun warming their faces. Inside the house, photo albums documented their decades together. David's school pictures, family Thanksgivings, graduations, and celebrations. Evidence of a life built on love and sacrifice. Attorney Mitchell and the marshal said their goodbyes. As they drove away, Samuel looked at his son. How did you arrange all that in 2 days? David smiled. I made some calls, called in a few favors. When you work in the federal court system, you meet people who care about justice, real justice. Not just what is legal, but what is right. Dorothy shook her head in wonder. We are so proud of you. David took both their hands. I am proud of you. You took in a foster kid that nobody wanted. You loved me. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. Everything I am is because you showed me how to be a good man. They went inside together. Dorothy made coffee the way she had done for 50 years. Samuel sat in his favorite chair by the window. David looked around at the modest living room, the worn furniture and family photos. This was home, not because of the building, but because of the people in it. Later that afternoon, as David prepared to drive back, he stood with his parents in the front yard. The oak tree rustled in the gentle breeze. You know, Samuel said, we never told you this, but when we adopted you, some people said we were crazy. An older couple taking in a troubled kid. They said it would be too hard, that we could not afford it. Dorothy nodded. But we knew. The moment we met you, we knew you were supposed to be our son. David felt his throat tighten. I was the lucky one. They hugged one more time. As David drove away, he watched them in the rearview mirror. 2 elderly people standing hand in hand in front of their home. They had given him everything. A home, a family, a chance at life, and today he had been able to give something back. Not just legal protection, but dignity, security, the knowledge that they mattered. That evening, Samuel and Dorothy sat on their porch as the sun set. They had done this for 42 years. watching the neighborhood change, watching seasons pass, watching their children grow. We are blessed. Dorothy said softly, "Yes." Samuel agreed. "We surely are." And in that moment, surrounded by memories and held secure by love, they understood what so many spend lifetimes searching for. That home is not a place. It is the people who love you, who stand beside you, who show up when you need them most. And that family is not always blood. Sometimes it is choice, it is commitment, it is a scared 7-year-old boy and 2 people brave enough to say yes. It is a federal judge who remembers where he came from and who he owes. It is love that endures. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments about a time someone stood up for you when you needed it most, or about a person who changed your life by simply believing in you. Your stories matter, and your support helps us share more stories of kindness, courage, and the bonds that hold us together. Thank you for listening.